This is the Z9, Nikon's current flagship camera body. And in this video, I'm going to talk about my experiences using this camera on loan from Nikon over the last 6 months. Let's get started. It's been close to a year and a half now since Nikon announced this camera and started sending it out. And in late 2022, they started fulfilling orders almost immediately. And that's when I got my first opportunity to have this camera on loan. So it's been out for quite a while now, and there's lots of reviews out there about what it can and can't do and what it does well and what it doesn't do well. So I'm not going to get into too much of that. I'm going to focus on what my experiences have been with this camera, what I like about it, things I don't necessarily like about it, or how it doesn't quite work for me. And then at the end of this video, I'll talk about whether or not I want to buy one for myself, or maybe choose something different. So let's get started with the things I like about it. It is a very, very capable camera, obviously, as it should be as a flagship. 45 megapixels, lots of resolution. The stacked sensor gives it lots of high ISO capability as well. It does very well for photographing the night sky, as I've tried that out a few times with it. One of the things I really like about this, especially for night photography, is on this big live view back screen here, it does a really good job of previewing your exposure even in really dark environments, as opposed to my Nikon Z6 II or Z7, where it's still a lot like in the past, where you just point it in the direction you think you're going to point it and take a picture for a test shot to see if your composition is good or not. With the Nikon Z9, you can actually see what your composition will look like even in the dark. I can see the Milky Way and the stars and the constellations and all that in the live view preview, which for somebody like me who doesn't see very well at night, that's huge. And I'll demonstrate that in one of my in the field clips. It also has a lot of these buttons on the back illuminate in the dark, which again is super helpful for me, so I'm not fumbling around trying to find the right button in the dark, trying to do it by feel, having to turn my headlamp on to find the right button to push. That's just less than ideal. Having buttons that light up but are not too bright so that they don't affect other things, that's just very, very, very helpful. All right, I am out here at Sprague Lake. I have the Z9 set up on the tripod with this vertical shot. I've got the Z24-70 lens. I'm gonna try and get that exposure to get right. There we go. Got the Z24-70 f2.8 lens on there at 24 millimeters. And we have this shot set up looking across the lake to the peaks of the Continental Divide. I don't know if you can tell with the pocket here. I'm gonna try and get in close there to adjust the exposure. Something I really like about this Z9, I can actually see the Milky Way in my live view preview there, as well as the mountains across the lake. I can see everything that I want to see. That is so nice. I wish my Z6 II did that. Even though it claims to be able to adjust to your exposure settings, it doesn't do this. This would be really nice. And of course you can see all the buttons on the back of the camera lit up right now, so I can see where my buttons are at without having to turn my headlamp on. I'm not here by myself tonight, but when I'm out with other people, that's a huge thing. The less I can turn my headlamp on, the better. So those are some winning things for the Z9 for night shooting, besides the image quality, which we'll talk about later on. Something I'm going to point out that's different from this camera than any other I've experienced is, while I am doing back-to-back shots for this stack, as you can see here, the image review for the last photo I took stays on the screen while the next shot is being taken, and it refreshes as it finishes. So this is an 8-second exposure, and during that 8 seconds for the next shot, the previous one stays on the screen for me to check it out. That's kind of cool. I've never had another camera do that. They always black out during exposures in the past. Maybe that's because this is a fully electronic shutter, where every other camera I've had has still had a physical shutter, including my Z6 II. But you can see there, it stays on the screen while it's taking the next shot. Kind of cool, and definitely different from anything else I've ever done. You can also see as I'm taking these that when I take the pictures, those buttons that light up on the back of the camera go dark. Probably wouldn't make that much of a difference anyway, but it's cool that they turn those off just in case for while the camera is taking pictures. So just another thing that's different and kind of cool about the Nikon Z9. But there is one more thing I want to try. After using the 24-70 Z mount lens, I pulled out one that I haven't tried on this camera yet, my Tamron 35mm f1.8 f mount lens. It's one of my favorites for night photography, and I've put it on here, and I'm gonna give it a try and see what it looks like before I call it a night and head back down the mountain. Let's see what it does. All right, so as usual, that is making a really nice perspective that I like a lot. So I'm gonna fire off some shots with this. The only issue I'm seeing right now is we're slightly crooked on that lower horizon, so I'm gonna try and get that straightened out. Fire off a bunch of shots to stack, and we'll go with it. Looks great. All right, I am up here in Rocky Mountain National Park with the Z9, and we're doing some Milky Way shooting. I'm trying to show you the composition on the back of my camera here, see if I can get it to darken in on the pocket here. I don't know how well you can see that, but the Milky Way is up over Long's Peak there in my shot. This is coming back and taking another run at a composition I've done pretty well at times past with my D750 a few years ago. Right now I have the Z14-24 lens on there at 24mm, and getting some wider shots here in a little bit. I'm going to put on my Tamron 35 prime, and then Nikon has also loaned me their Z50mm f1.2 that I'm going to throw on there as well before I leave. And there went the image off the back of the camera. But out here with the Z9, getting some shots. It is super cold. It's supposed to be below zero, and it definitely feels that. My beard is freezing up quickly, so I'm going to keep working on it before I get too cold and have to head back to the car. But it's good to be out here shooting the Milky Way again. Now the bottom of this camera, this whole section along the bottom here, is the battery. It has a very big battery that comes with it. It makes it big and heavy, but I'll tell you what, that big battery does come in handy. In my experiences out shooting, doing landscape photography, that battery lasts for quite a few sessions. It's almost like a flashback to the days of using DSLRs where the batteries lasted a long time. Because let's be honest, what is the Achilles heel of mirrorless cameras and all that live view screen and the EVF? It blows through your battery really fast, doesn't it? But with a big battery like this, it really compensates for that quite a bit to where you're not blasting through your power near as quickly as I do on my Z6 II or Z7. So I really enjoy that part of it. Everybody knows by this point the image quality from this camera is superb. Lots of buttons here on the back to help you adjust your settings on the back, on the top. Everything's really easy to adjust. You've got 3 function buttons here on the front. Buttons on here, this one I'm not even sure what it does in my usage. And of course, a nice advantage for big cameras like this, if you're flipping to vertical, hey, you've got your own vertical shutter button, ISO button, control wheels on the front and back. Having those extra controls there to where you're not reaching around like this, you can just do it like this. Super nice. So this camera is fully electronic shutter, which makes it really, really quiet. Although the fake shutter sound they program into it is a little bit weird, to be honest, but makes it quiet. And these buttons are really soft touch. They don't take a strong push to focus and take the picture. So at times when I've had trouble syncing it up with my phone because I've had 3 different loaner cameras in my time using it, having it on the tripod and actually pushing the shutter button doesn't take a lot, and so it doesn't cause much camera shake. I do have a really sturdy tripod and that helps, but these buttons are really soft touch and that's nice. Dual memory card slots, although they are both CF Express slots, which can be a little trickier depending on the card readers that you have, but dual slots are nice so you can back up, have lots of space to store your pictures, all of that. I do prefer that over a single memory card slot, just for ease of use and backing up my images. I haven't tried to shoot video with this camera. It is a really, really capable video camera. It goes up to 8K. I haven't had the opportunity to use it for that. I'm shooting this video with my Nikon Z6 II, so I won't comment much on the video capabilities, but it is supposed to be really, really good. And I have not had any compatibility issues using the FTZ2 adapter for any of my older F-mount lenses, as well as the new Z-mount lenses. Obviously those work great. Focusing with this camera really, really good for my usage as a landscape photographer. A little bit of wildlife here and there, but does really well for that purpose. So those are probably the main things that I really, really like about this camera. One more feature about this camera that I really like is the built-in GPS. I don't have to connect it to my phone to location tag my pictures. It's built into the camera. Some of that comes from, again, the big camera body that allows it to have that feature. But I really like that the GPS is built in. I don't have to connect my phone to the camera like I do with the Z6 II, Z7 to get the location tagging on my pictures. It's all right there and built into the camera. One of my favorite things about the Z9. Now let's get into the things that maybe are not as nice, drawbacks, or things that don't necessarily fit my needs as a landscape photographer. Now, first of all, you can tell by looking at the camera, this is a big and heavy beast. And if you're walking around with this around your neck all day, if you're trying to hike with this, it's big, it's heavy, and you're gonna feel it in comparison to something like my Z6 II or Z7 that are much smaller and lighter. That gives you that big battery with lots of power. Up until now, it gave you faster autofocus rates, faster burst rates, all of those things. And we'll get into that a little bit later in the video, but this had capabilities that were far better than anything else in Nikon's lineup up until very recently. And some of that came from the big size of this camera. Something else that I wish it did that my Nikon Z6 II does, for example, this has the extended shutter times in manual mode my Z6 II does, to go longer than 30 seconds, out to 60 seconds, out to a minute, 2 minutes. I think it goes out to 15 minutes. But on my Nikon Z6 II, it actually does a countdown on this top panel as it's going through those extended shutter speed times. This camera doesn't do that. Why not? This is supposed to be a more premium camera. Why did they take a feature away from a lesser camera body in the lineup and not have it in this camera when they have it in my Z6 II? That seems odd, and it's a feature I really appreciate when I'm doing like my 5-minute exposures for the foreground in my night sky shots, that I can watch that countdown on the top panel of the camera. This camera doesn't do that. I really miss that feature when I've used it for night sky photography. Now, there have been other users on YouTube, I'll just say that even as good as the autofocus system on this camera is, that they criticize it in certain use cases and say it's still not good enough and not as good as the competition. I will say in my usage as a landscape photographer, it has done everything I've wanted it to do. The little bit of wildlife photography that I've done with it, not a lot, it's done everything that I've wanted it to do. I don't shoot sports, I don't shoot a lot of high action except for those occasional wildlife shoots that I do. Those may be the instances when it may have a little more trouble. I said I didn't try it for video. Maybe it would have a little trouble with that, although from what I've seen, honestly, it should perform pretty well. So for my usage, it's done a great job. I'm trying to think of some other drawbacks, but honestly, I think that's about it. It's big, it doesn't have the countdown timer on the top for extended exposure times. Some people criticize the autofocus. I've found to do what I want to do for me. But you may mention the price. To buy one of these brand new, it is still $5,500. It's a flagship camera. It's expensive. That's a lot of money to invest in this, even as a professional. But if you're not a professional and you're just looking to buy something like this, that's a big chunk of change to throw down before you've even bought an extra battery and memory cards and lenses and all that stuff to go with it. There's cheaper cameras in Nikon's lineup. That's a big price tag. But compared to a lot of other flagships out there, or what Nikon has charged for flagships in the past, $5,500 in that conversation isn't really that bad. And I think that's about it. That's really my only complaints or disappointments with this camera. It's done a really good job for me in my usage. All right, we'll get down to the final question for this video. Now that I've had it for 3 separate times, I got it as a loaner from Nikon in November of 2022 for the first time. I got it again in March of 2023, at the end of March, to try it for some Milky Way photography in Rocky Mountain National Park. And this time I'm just finishing up another 2-week loan that I used to take it on a trip to Capitol Reef National Park in Utah. So I've spent, let's say, about 4 weeks of time using this camera between those 3 opportunities. And I'm recording this in early June, so I've just gotten back from that Memorial Day week trip to Utah. So what is my final verdict on this camera? Do I want to buy it for myself? Do I not? Well, up to this point, my attitude was always, it's really nice, it does a lot of great things. That's a big price tag. It's probably more camera than I need. So probably not, but maybe. And then, about 3 weeks ago, Nikon announced the Z8 camera body, which is basically this camera, slice it off right about here, so it's smaller, lighter, less battery power, because now the battery has to go up in here in the side, but it still does all the same things. It still has the same sensor, the same autofocus system, the same burst rates, all those things. It still has all the same capability except for less battery life because it has a smaller battery. And it costs $1,500 less. So guess what? I am very soon going to get a Z8 on order. So this will be my last time loaning out this camera from Nikon Professional Services. It's been great. I've had a great experience doing that. But once that Z8 comes in, it's going to give me 99% of what this camera does in a smaller and lighter body that costs me less money. And to me, that's just a win-win. So I'm looking forward to getting that in and sharing that camera with you coming up soon. I hope you've appreciated my review of the Z9. It is a great camera body. I've enjoyed using it. I've taken some great pictures with it. But now that the Z8 is out and it can do almost everything that this camera body was, I can't wait to get my hands on that. So we'll leave it there. Thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.